You know, 177 years ago, there were about 200 folks who gave their all, right behind me, for liberty. And I think it's illustrative to kind of evaluate the reasons they did that. And of course, the Alamo fell on the 6th of March, 1836, but a few days before that, on the 2nd of March, 1836, they wrote the Declaration of Texas Independence. And not necessarily the gentlemen who were here and who gave their ultimate sacrifice, but the gentleman that wrote the Declaration of Independence. And I want to read something from that document. They enumerated the reasons that they sought independence from Mexico. It's a very inspiring document. But in part, they said, in referencing the tyrant Santa Anna, the following: Mexico has demanded us to deliver up our arms, which are essential to our defense, the rightful property of free men, and formidable only to tyrannical governments. That's what it was about, among other liberties that they also enumerated. And so that's why we're here today, to emphasize our ability and our right to defend those liberties. It's real simple. Not only I see some come and take it flags, it's also interesting that the first battle of the Texas Revolution was in Gonzales, when the Mexican army went to Gonzales to take the cannon away from the settlers who lived there. And they said no. They said, come and take it. The Mexican army was unsuccessful in doing that. And then some of those men who were at that battle were also among the Martel 32 that rode to Alamo and came here to reinforce the garrison. And they died here. So some of those who were involved in that come and take it fight also gave the ultimate price for liberty. The Second Amendment, in my view, is the defender of the rest. And you also have to go back to the founders and what they wrote, what they said, what they meant. They were very careful when they wrote our Bill of Rights to emphasize that these rights were not granted by government. That these are God-given natural rights. And that they merely enumerated those rights, the first, the second, the fourth, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth, all of those. They merely enumerated those rights. Because if you accept the premise that government can give you rights, you must also accept the premise that that same government can take them away.
No way.
So it's not about defending the actions of man and our founders. It's about defending the liberty that we enjoy by virtue of being born free men and free women. Now, you know, it was mentioned that I'm the author of the concealed handgun law, and that's correct. I passed it in 1993. Our governor at that time, Ann Richards, vetoed it. In part, she was beaten because of that veto. 2 years later, I passed it again, 1995, Senate Bill 60. And if you recall the discussion at that time, every editorial board in the state of Texas opined that if we passed the Texas concealed handgun law, it would be blood in the streets, wild, wild west, and shootouts at every four-way stop. So how many of y'all have been involved in a shootout at a four-way stop since we passed that bill? The point is that men and women who are so concerned with obeying the law, you know, unlawful carry of a handgun is generally a Class A misdemeanor. Can you imagine someone who's concerned with not being charged with Class A misdemeanor committing a capital offense? It just doesn't compute. The folks who seek the permit are the folks who, by definition, are law-abiding. Now, one of the problems we had back in 1995, when we passed the concealed handgun law, is that many municipalities around the state of Texas adopted ordinances that said no concealed handguns in the city limits, no loaded firearms. And while I don't know the history here in San Antonio, what I can tell you is that my suspicion is that the city ordinance that says you can't have a loaded firearm unless you're a police officer or a security guard came out of that 1995 bill when all these municipalities passed prohibitions. My point is today is that the gentlemen who wear blue, or the gentlemen that wear whatever color uniform it may be, that are involved in our law enforcement, are not the ones who make law. They have that sometimes burden to enforce a law that's on the books that they may not agree with. And I will tell you, when we talk about San Antonio PD or DPS, you have to recognize that those cops on the street are not here to adjudicate, to evaluate the constitutionality, to compare a city ordinance to a state law that prohibits that city ordinance. That's not their job.
That's right.
Their job is to enforce the law however bad it may be. So what I say to you is, one of the reasons we're having this event today and it's being so successful is the San Antonio Police Department. I have had many conversations with Chief McManus about, yes, the chief says, I'm with you. This is the Constitution. We believe in your right to do this. We're going to help you make this a successful event. So when we move forward around Texas, continuing to advocate for our fundamental, God-given, natural right to keep and bear arms, any anger you have, focus it at the lawmakers. Focus it at, and you shouldn't even have anger. You should go, focus it at the lawmakers, whether it's city council, whether it's county commissioner's court, whether it's the Texas legislature, the United States Congress. Those are where the laws emanate from. Those are where the violations of our liberty come from. It's not the cop on the street. They're just in a bind. They got to enforce the law even if they may not think it's the right kind of law. That's not their job. We're here to celebrate liberty. We're here to show the world that we can do things in a law-abiding manner. That the mere presence of a visible firearm should not be cause for alarm. When I was in junior high, which was a long time ago, in Hartman Junior High School in Houston, Texas, I took a muzzle-loading Civil War between the states, or war of northern aggression, depending on however you want to describe it. I took one to school for show and tell. And I showed my class how you load a muzzle loader. And everybody loved it. It was a really neat historical, it's a history. I remember getting out of my mom's car, we carpooled, and I walked up to the hall monitor, who was the football coach, and I said, Coach, I don't want to carry this gun around all day in school, and I take it to my homeroom. And he wrote me a pass, and it said, to take gun to homeroom. Now, can you imagine what would happen today? The problem is, though, we're not living in the 1950s. We're living in a time when we have folks who have firearms who maybe shouldn't have them, people who are mentally deranged. And what do those folks do when they want to wreak mayhem? What do those folks do when they want to? Exactly. They are. I call them venue shooters. They go to where they know that the firearms are prohibited. Whether it's Sandy Hook, whether it's Aurora, Colorado, whether it's Virginia Tech, etc., etc.
Every time.
Laws do not make us safer. Liberty makes us safer. So, I don't want to take a lot of time. I want to emphasize a couple of things. The mere fact that we are here today has some controversy associated with it. I respect the opinions of folks who say, no, this is not the right place. But I would submit to you, there's one standard we should apply to gatherings here at this sacred cradle of Texas liberty. And that is whether our activity and our purpose would be supported by those men who gave it all. They were fighting for the right to keep and bear arms. They were fighting for religious freedom. They were fighting for the freedom of speech. They were fighting for liberty to own property. They were fighting for liberty against oppression. And that's what they were for. So I submit to you that they would be supportive of our reason to be here. I would also tell you that I'm not one of those who believes that somebody's going to come knocking on my door and take my guns. But it's not about what happens today. We're not defending liberty for ourselves. We're defending liberty for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. And for those who say that, no, that's just a pipe dream, that would never happen, I submit to you what happened in New Orleans when the New Orleans PD confiscated firearms. It does happen. It happens infrequently. But we still have to prove, and we still have to make the point that no, we're not going to let that happen. And we have, in this country, the wonderful thing about this country is we have a peaceable means to protest what we believe to be wrong. We have legislatures and Congress. We have the best political systems, in spite of its flaws, of any nation in the world. So we're blessed with that. And we're blessed with a vehicle to do things and correct wrongs without having to do what was done here 177 years ago. Right. We need to keep that in mind. I would like to also point out something. This is not a political event. This is an event about liberty. And someone says, you know, I've had several press conversations, people say it's politics, and I tell you, you know what, if folks gathering to support their First and Second Amendment is politics, then we need more of it. No one is here to ask for your vote, and if they do, I'm going to ask them to leave the podium. We're here to show that we believe in liberty. Now, I'm going to ask you to do some things for me. This is a sacred place. There are hundreds of folks who are going to go into this shrine, and they're from other countries. They assemble here, they come in. I'm going to ask you to have the consideration to give them room to do this. We have a very small footprint here at the Alamo. And so keep in mind that if we have a big crowd and it blocks this entrance here, that folks can't get in there. I want you to be cognizant of that. We also have some requests about the way we show reverence for what happened behind me. When you go in there, no covers, no caps, no hats. When you go in there, no loud voices. Go in there with reverence. When you go in there, I'm asking you not to take your visibly carried firearm. Even though you could lawfully do that, we have a reverence for that location where those men died. And we ask you to comply with those requests. We also ask you, placards, you know, all of that, please keep it out here on the street. We just want, this is a place of reverence. It's like a cemetery. In matter of fact, this is a cemetery. There were many Indians who were buried right here where we stand in the deal when this was part of the Alamo missions. Please do that. Please show reverence. Please show respect. Please keep standing up for liberty and showing the folks who are looking upon us today and saying, ooh, I'm not comfortable, that there's no reason to not be comfortable.
Yeah. Here, here.